right, welcome back to One True Podcast. With me, as always, is my good friend Zach Smith. Zach, how are you?
Wonderful day. It's all the sports going on, and I was working on my preview for Saturday's game, and I know our guest will not be happy to know that rain is in the forecast. Eric, I can send you a couple how-to videos about how to put on a poncho if you're interested in something like that.
Ouch! I didn't even go there.
I think it's too late for me, Zach. I think
We are joined by Eric Kelly of Fox 44 here in Waco. Our good friend Eric. Eric and I played basketball together quite a bit. Eric's been at Fox since 2021. An Ohio boy, right? Where in Ohio did you grow up?
So I'm from the football powerhouse of Kirtland, Ohio, 30 minutes east of Cleveland, the equivalent of essentially what I think a 2A would be here.
Okay.
We went to our first state championship when I was a senior in high school. Since then, I'm going to get these stats wrong. I think we've gone to 7 since, and we've won a bunch of them. We had the longest active winning streak in Ohio at one point.
Nice.
We beat the equivalent of a 6A.
So all they had to do was get rid of you.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't even on the football team. My vibes, once they got rid of my vibes, it was just upwards and onwards. But yeah.
Well, and Zach was showing off his sweatshirt in honor of you, the Columbus crew there. How about that? That's nice.
Yeah, my childhood friends would enjoy that. I have a friend from one of my best friends from my childhood is a season ticket holder for the Columbus crew, so he would enjoy that mightily.
Nice.
Future MLS Cup champions.
Yes.
There you go. Okay. Well, we won't devolve into any soccer talk.
Yeah.
So guys, Eric covers Baylor just like we do. Guys, Baylor is playing out the string, this Saturday against West Virginia, regular season finale, a game that I think should probably feature plenty of legroom for the fans. I think good seats will be available. Obviously, we've almost reached that point of the year where we're kind of all on Dave watch, to see if Dave Aranda, is back for another season or whether he potentially is looking for work. What is y'all's sense of this in terms of Dave's status, and does this game factor into it at all? Does it even matter? Eric, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know in any world that it does matter, right? I mean, does beating West Virginia mean that much to the fans at this point? I mean, you had your chances to kind of make a statement. You could have beat a top 25 team in Kansas State late in the season. You didn't. You had a chance to win the rivalry game against TCU. You didn't. I would argue those results would have mattered more than beating West Virginia, albeit Mountaineers have had a solid season, better than I think a lot of people expected. But I think the last 2 weeks, in terms of getting that result that would have helped Dave Aranda in any way, would have passed us before the final game of the season. I don't know at this point if it's results-based as much as it might be buyout-based, and whether or not you can pay that, how the buyout changes. Obviously, we don't exactly know those numbers because they aren't public information, but you wonder how much that's a factor as opposed to maybe whether or not they actually do win on the field this season.
Yeah, no doubt. Zach, what do you think?
I go back and forth on this. I've been in the camp that my gut kind of says he's back. I agree that the buyout numbers are, I think, probably more than Baylor can stomach at this point. The Fudges are building a football center. The Fosters are building a basketball arena. So how much more money is left? But at the same time, I listen to, national reporters, and it seems like they're all dropping breadcrumbs. Eric, you'll like this one. Barry Odom's having a great year at UNLV. Who hired Odom at Missouri? Mac Rhodes. So just like there's little kind of notes out there that maybe something has happened, but at the same time, I 100% agree with Eric that, if something was going to happen, I kind of feel like it already would have. So, my gut says he's back, but, nothing would surprise me at this point.
One reason you do see college coaches actually getting fired in season these days is because of National Signing Day now being in December. And these teams like to get a jump start on their recruiting with the new guy, try to maybe hold on to some of the commits they have and that kind of thing. I think you're right that if Dave were to go, that maybe Mac would have already pulled the plug. But we'll see. I mean, I think each subsequent loss this year has not obviously helped Dave's case. So it's just continued to spiral a little bit. But
Brice, I have a question for you off of that. Apologies on that. In terms of that, I wonder, do you almost think that Baylor is waiting to see if A&M pulls the trigger on Jeff Traylor? And if a guy like that's available, knowing that maybe a lot of the fans would have loved to see Joey in that same role, a guy who's similar to that, to see, well, we don't know if we necessarily want to compete money-wise with A&M, but if they pass on him, he's almost too good to pass up, and we try to find the money.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, here's the thing. I think anytime an athletic director, any good athletic director, has kind of a short list of candidates that he probably always keeps, even if things are going swimmingly with your head coach, just in case something happens. And I would suspect that Jeff Traylor is probably high on Mack Rhodes' list. Now, that said, Mack has shown a tendency. He did it with Matt Rule. He did it with Nicky Collin, to a lesser extent with Aranda, of just kind of going his own way. Like, Matt Rule was not really on anyone's radar when we were writing all the coaching speculation, who they're going to hire searches back in the day. Nicky Collin was a little bit of an out-of-the-box hire in terms of women's basketball. So, Jeff Traylor makes a lot of sense to you and me and Zach, but I mean, Mac might go his own way. He does his own thing. So who knows? We'll see.
He does not care. Mac does not care what the internet or anyone outside of Baylor thinks. Even about Dave. Like, if the whole internet is calling for Dave's head, Mac doesn't care, right?
That's true. He's going to do his own thing. Now, that said, I would think, as I wrote today in a story, there's got to be some sort of staff shakeup. I mean, we've talked a lot about Jeff Grimes on the pod this year. I can't imagine him being back. Obviously, the defense was not very good this year. You had a first-year coordinator there. I don't know. I mean, they're going to have to do something different.
It's just, how many scapegoats can you have at this point before eventually the problem is bigger than that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and to that point, so there has been a lot of problem areas to go around. I think they rank 68th in total offense. They rank 108th or something in total defense. I wouldn't say the special teams is any great shakes either. What area do you feel like, and it could be bigger than just offense, defense, what area does Baylor need to improve the most?
Yeah, I'll just start with, I'm going to go two different ways. If Jeff Grimes remains around somehow, which I think we're in agreement that he probably won't, but I mean, the offensive line has been awful in a lot of ways, especially when you just need a yard to run the ball. And you could go secondary, because I think there's been a lot of issues in the secondary, but I think we were in agreement that going into the season, I don't think we expected the secondary to be very good. I think we talked a lot about how young they were and how much they would struggle. And we were maybe surprised a little bit by the fact that they were okay early on in the year, and there's kind of been some regression.
Yeah, I would say Caden Jenkins kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think we expected the O-line to be good because they went out, they got guys out of the transfer portal. They got guys with experience and honors to their name in that area. So I don't know if I expected the offensive line to be as bad as they were. And so for that reason, I think that would be maybe more of a concern than maybe just a youthful secondary.
Yeah, that's a good point. Zach?
Yeah, Eric nailed it. It's the offensive line. I think there's an argument, if you kind of want to look all the way back to the Texas State game, if Blake Shapen isn't running for his life and he doesn't get hurt in that game, can Baylor win that game? And then then Baylor probably has a better shot against Utah with Shapen in there if he's not hurt. And then those two games, again, we're playing a giant what if game, but that changes the whole season around. And then on top of that, Richard Reese has been kind of non-existent for most of this year. And, Aranda's been pretty clear that that's because guys like Dawson Pendergrass and Dom Richardson kind of run through people. And I think they're needing to run through people because of the offensive line. So, it's hard to look anywhere else because, it's cliche to say it starts up front, but it pretty clearly does.
And the Richard Reese thing is baffling to me because you look and you expect his numbers to be much worse in terms of a yards per carry number than Dawson and Dom. They're about the same. So I'm just curious as to if the yards per carry are about the same and Richard had such a good season last year, what are they seeing in practice that maybe it's got to be something you would assume that we're not seeing on the field on Saturday that's led to his lack of usage?
Agreed. I mean, you got to think, he's in the doghouse. He's just got to be. I mean, in terms of maybe it's practice habits or something, which, I mean, I hate to disparage Richard Reese like that without really knowing all the facts, but at the same time, I mean, clearly he's not getting used, and it's I agree, Eric, it's baffling. I mean, so guys, I've seen a lot of Baylor football over the years. I've been here 25 years. You guys have no idea. I mean, early 2000s, they were god awful at every position. But I did write in my column last week that this might be the worst offensive line I've seen in 25 years. And Eric's right. I mean, it is sort of inexplicable. I mean, we didn't really see this coming. I mean, they can't squeeze out a yard on the ground. I mean, and then as y'all said, Blake is constantly running for his life. To me, he's probably the offensive MVP, and he's got 13 touchdown passes, something like that. I mean, nothing really great, but he's probably the offensive MVP. And then I put probably Caden Jenkins as the defensive MVP. I mean, they've had very few like playmakers on that side of the ball. I feel like Matt Jones is kind of flashy, but not as consistent as like a Dylan Doyle or a Clay Johnston or Terrell Bernard, obviously. I mean, so yeah, it's they got a lot to figure out. So go ahead.
Sorry, add one more point to that. I mean, I don't know if we've heard a lot about the struggles there this season, but looking at the stats, it was alarming to see the wide receiver group only have Monterey Baldwin as the one guy who scored a touchdown this year. I mean, how many wide receiver groups in the country only who scored a touchdown with two running backs who have receiving touchdowns this year, and they only have one wide receiver? I mean, I don't know how much of that is usage of the tight end just being higher or just the wide receivers just not being able to get open in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, they have not impressed me either. Monterey is a guy that I thought prior to last season was going to be their big breakout guy. Remember, he had that big run in the Sugar Bowl on like an end around or something, and it was like, man, Monterey is going to be the breakout guy next year, and he really wasn't. I mean, and part of it I think is the way they utilize guys, and I feel like he hasn't gotten enough. I don't think they do enough downfield throws. Now, they tried a couple. This is definitely not on Jeff Grimes. He can't go out there and freaking catch the ball for them. They tried a couple in that TCU game. Boop, out of Monterey's hands. Boop, out of Keytron's hands. I mean, come on, make the catch, make the play. I mean, that was pathetic, really. So anyway, all right, let's move on. So speaking of hot seats, coming into the season, Neal Brown's seat was pretty toasty there at West Virginia. I would say one of the hottest in the country. I think everybody was pretty much just chalking it up that he would lose his job. But the Mountaineers could be on their way to an 8-win season if they do knock off Baylor on Saturday. and they were picked last in the conference, as Neal Brown reminded us all on Big 12 Media Day. So, guys, is Neal Brown your Big 12 Coach of the Year? And if not, who is? Zach, I'll start with you.
I think he's one of two clear picks for Coach of the Year. I think I give him a lot of credit. I think that he's kind of coaching the team that he has and not the team he wants. I think in a perfect world, he would probably be throwing the ball 50 times a game, but with a very experienced offensive line, 2 running backs in the top 10 in rushing, and a legit kind of dual threat quarterback. I think that, like I said, he's coaching the team he has and not the team he wants, and it's working for him. He's kind of, playing with the cards he was dealt. I know I'm always the one wearing burnt orange on this podcast, but I think Sark has done a fantastic job at Texas. I think being a head coach is as much about dealing with the BS as it is X's and O's, and there's more BS at Texas than probably anywhere else. And the constant pressure of being back and the injuries, and are we going to see Arch and everything? And I know they've looked shaky in some of the games, but they're still 10-1 and fighting for a college football playoff spot. So, if not Neal Brown, then I think Sark is kind of the clear pick for me.
Yeah, that's good. Eric?
It's interesting because I'm a big guy who, whether or not it's a fault of mine or not, I'm a big looks at the rankings preseason and kind of evaluates it based off that. So I have 2 guys, one who I would say would be, for me, my pick, and then one guy who's maybe a little bit off the radar. My pick so far would be Mike Gundy. Pick 7th, pick just about middle of the table. And then I think the wheels looked like they were falling off. Got blown out by South Alabama at home. And I think a lot of people were like, wow, is this the year Mike Gundy's finally in a little bit of danger for his job? Playing with journeyman Alan Bowman at quarterback, who to date him has been playing quarterback in the Big 12 since I think like my second year in Lubbock, which was back in like 2018. So he's been there for a while. And all of a sudden you look at, and the Cowboys, if they win on Saturday or they win this weekend, are in the Big 12 championship game. So I think the way Gundy's been able to handle all of that, I think has put him up near the top of that award for me. And then the other guy is Matt Campbell. Have the Cyclones been great? No, not really. But have they been serviceable, considering the fact that he lost a lot of those guys to that gambling case at Iowa State? I think he's playing with a lot of guys he didn't expect would be starting for him this season. I don't know how much national attention that got, considering how big of a story I think it was in the Big 12. But I think what Matt Campbell has done at Iowa State, making them competitive. They almost beat Texas on Saturday, making them competitive with guys who maybe thought that they weren't going to play as much, especially at some of those key positions like running back and starting quarterback, I think is also a commendable job by him, considering he was another guy who fans were yelling at him to get fired halfway through the season. He's kind of turned it around a little bit.
I think those are some good choices by all of y'all. And I think you make compelling cases. We all are on. I saw your name on that email from Stephen Hawkins that we're all going to be voting on that all Big 12 team for the AP. I'm sticking with Neal Brown. I mean, if you're picked last and you win 8 games, which it looks like that's probably going to happen. Yeah, I mean, and given how hot his seat was, but I think Eric's right. I mean, I went to college in Oklahoma and I'm in a fantasy football league with a bunch of Oklahoma dudes. And if they're not Sooner fans in that league, they're Cowboy fans. And one of the guys was like, yeah, all of my friends were calling for Gundy's head. I mean, everyone was. And now look at him. I mean, like Eric said, probably going to be in the Big 12 championship game. So yeah, Gundy's got a pretty convincing case. And I have said for a long time that I think I wrote a column back when OU and Texas were first kind of leaving and said, there's a real opportunity here for Oklahoma State and Baylor to maybe step in as kind of the new powers of the Big 12. And I don't know that that's happening for Baylor right now, but Oklahoma State, maybe we'll see. I mean, and then of course since then we've had new teams join the Big 12 from the Pac-12. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that whole dynamic plays out. So guys, finally, I am a Heisman voter. And it's late November, and this is always the case. I have not made up my mind. Maybe every once in a while I have, but and one of the rules of being a Heisman voter is you can't reveal your ballot. You can sort of intimate or talk about candidates or whatever, but you can't reveal your actual ballot until after the announcement. And John Werner and I would always do what we call dueling Heisman columns after we'd run them, they would basically publish right after the announcement was made, with his votes, my votes. So I'm still undecided, as I said. What I want to hear from you guys is give me 3 guys who would be on your own Heisman ballot, and maybe a dark horse too. Who should I be looking at? Eric, what do you think?
So I went back and forth looking at the stats here. I think it's very difficult. There's 3 obviously quarterbacks who are kind of the guys at the top of that list. And in the end, I think there's 2-horse race for first place right now between obviously Jaden Daniels at LSU and Bo Nix at Oregon. By the way, who would have thought Bo Nix would ever?
What about Michael Penix?
I'm about to go into why. I think obviously when you look at stats, Daniels and Nix atop the board in terms of passing touchdowns by a quite significant margin. I think it's 6 and 5 more than Penix has thrown at Washington. Also, passing yards are about the same. Now, here's where they separate themselves. Jaden Daniels is my number 1 for a big reason. He's first in passing efficiency, first in touchdowns, third in passing yards, and the passing yards isn't as big of a gap as maybe he has in other areas. He's also first in the country in rushing yards per attempt. Only quarterback outside of the quarterback at Liberty, who of course is in the number 1 rushing offense in the country, who's in the top 30 in that category. He's the only one in the top 10 who's a quarterback. So the fact that he's able to not only do that through the passing game, which I think a lot of people look at, but the fact that he's efficient in the running game, I think is what, for me, separates him from the rest of those guys. And then the other, number 2 would be Nix, only because I look at passing efficiency and whether or not you can, and quarterback rating is the other thing. I think quarterback rating and completion percentage. Completion percentage, both him and Daniels are in the top 10. Penix is down at 20. So putting up numbers is great in terms of passing yards and passing touchdowns, and that's always so close. So I think you got to look at the other things and how efficient are these guys? What's the completion percentage?
All right, I'm gonna play devil's advocate to you here, Eric.
Yeah.
Penix has 0 losses and Daniels has 1. Correct?
Who cares? It's an individual award.
I think it comes down to individual award, and Daniels also takes care of the ball better than anybody else. He only has 2 interceptions, which for putting up those types of numbers and keeping the ball. Also as a Missouri grad. That defense at LSU is horrible. It is atrocious. So he's got to essentially win track meets against every team in the country, and you can only do so much in some areas. And then number 3 for me, I'm going to be the most popular man in Stillwater. I don't think he's anywhere. This could be my dark horse too. I love what Ollie Gordon has done at Oklahoma State. You think about, he's number 1 in rushing yards. He's up there in rushing touchdowns, and he's done all this. He barely had over 100 rushing yards total after their non-conference schedule. So he's done all of this against Big 12 defenses. So I'm a big guy who, the only thing I don't love about Jaden Daniels is he stat pads a little bit against teams like Georgia State, where he had 8 touchdowns in a game where they probably could have pulled him in the third quarter. But the fact that Ollie Gordon did essentially nothing against teams like South Alabama and Central Arkansas, only had 44 rushing yards against Central Arkansas. Now he's at 1,414 with possibly 2 games left for him to add to those totals, I think is really impressive.
Agreed. I like that. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not going to belabor the point. Eric nailed all the stats. It's Jaden Daniels, and it's not even close. It's the Heisman's an individual award, not a team award. if LSU were 3-8 instead of 8-3, obviously I think we'd be having a different discussion. But I don't think Jaden Daniels would have the stats he has. 417 yards a game. That's way more than Nick's. More total touchdowns than Nick's. More yards per attempt than Nick's. You know, the only thing is LSU is not competing for a college football playoff spot, and to me that doesn't matter. So it's Jaden Daniels 1, Nick's.
Well, you're not thinking like a Heisman voter, because it does matter. It absolutely does matter to a lot of Heisman voters, and maybe it shouldn't, but I mean, I would say the last guy. Now, obviously LSU only has one loss. Okay, I mean, but the last guy that won it while having like multiple losses. I mean, I'd have to look this up to make sure, but it just going off the top of my head, I think it was probably RG3. And that was, you know, Baylor coming out of the ashes, and Robert, you know, they secured a bunch of big wins, but yeah, I mean, I think it's very much a quarterback award, and it's very much often, now, does that mean that the dude at Georgia, who's the quarterback at Georgia?
Carson Beck. Now, Caleb Williams, by the way, had 2 losses last year after the Pac-12 championship.
Yeah, well. And I didn't vote for him. He was not my pick. Who was my pick? I don't know. I can't even remember. At any rate, I think y'all make fair points, but I do think that win-loss record matters, because it often comes from a guy that is going to the college football playoff, at least in recent seasons. And a guy y'all didn't mention that I think at least deserves some consideration is maybe Marvin Harrison Jr.
That was my off-board pick.
Yeah. I mean, he's clearly an incredible receiver that I think is going to do big things in the NFL. I always like to have sort of at least one kind of, I don't mind going out of the box, basically, is what I'm saying. I've had defensive guys on my ballot. I don't know. Is there a defensive guy out there that's worthy of being in the top 3 at least?
I mean, maybe Edgerrin Cooper at Texas A&M. He's had a really good year in terms of tackle for loss. The only thing I would say about Marvin Harrison Jr., I think a lot of his Heisman campaign is the fact that he could possibly be a top 3 pick. Troy Franklin and Malik Neighbors both have more receiving yards than him and just as many receiving touchdowns. So I'm just making the case. Are they in better offenses? Maybe. But I mean, if you're looking at a stats perspective, I think those guys probably have a better argument if you're looking at
I think that's a fair point. And for me, I can't even explain what all goes into it in my thinking. In the little description of what they, you know, give us for the award, you know, it's very, I would say, up to interpretation. You know, you vote for the most outstanding player in college football. Well, that's kind of up to you what that even means. For me, I like to look at consistency throughout the year, and so I will go through a guy's game log, you know, game by game, and say, how consistent was he, you know? And I could see putting Ollie Gordon in my top 3, but maybe those couple of games where he did sort of was held down a little bit, maybe that would work against him. I think Eric makes a good point on Marvin Harrison. There's some other really good receivers out there. And I do think it helps, and this is probably still to come for some of these guys, if you have that Heisman moment, right? You know, if you have that one sort of moment where you can kind of hang your hat on, it goes back a long way. I mean, Desmond Howard had that moment in the 90s, you know. Robert definitely had that moment at Baylor. I had David K screaming in my ear on the sideline. We used to go down to the sideline at the end of the games because we would have to go into the interview room from the sideline, and David K standing next to me, and Robert throws that touchdown pass against Oklahoma to Terrence Williams, and he's screaming in my ear, "There's your Heisman moment!" and I'm like, dude, okay, I get it.
That's where Jaden might suffer a little bit. I mean, I will say he's my clear number 1 right now. It might hurt him that he doesn't play on championship weekend, back to what the point you made. I mean, if Bo Nix goes out there and makes a big play for Oregon, I mean, that could sway voters. But I will make the argument. You talked about guys who maybe haven't made the CFP, and that's in that CFP era, but even just a little bit beyond. You talked about RG3. Johnny Manziel had a couple losses at A&M. Caleb Williams, Lamar Jackson. I don't even know. Did Louisville make a BCS bowl that year with Lamar Jackson, but or a New Year's Six bowl? So the case has been there that guys have been able to put up numbers and not do that. It is also to the fact that, do people think he's stat padding in those games where he doesn't need to be?
Right.
That again, championship weekend, it's always interesting to see how that affects voters.
Great points all around. I disagree with Zach. I do think it's close. It's not close. It's not a blowout in my mind. I mean, I don't have Jaden Daniels just up there locked in stone, clearly. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But good points all around. And Eric, thanks for hopping on with us. And we'll see you, I assume, on Saturday, right?
Yeah, it was a pleasure as always, boys. Thank you for taking my voice for newspaper and putting it on a podcast. I'm sure Central Texas will thank you.
You're a broadcaster. You got a good
you're
voice.
You're on TV more than we are.
Yeah. Look at that beautiful face. We'll see y'all. Peace out.